as the Dark Persuasion expert. And so what we're going to talk about today is the master structure for world domination. I got a little bit of a head cold, so my voice is kind of off, but regardless of the fact, we're going to bring this particular game to the forefront. And this is going to be information for people that are trying to figure out, how can I take what I'm doing and build a structure around it? So if something happens to me, what I've built continues to carry on. And if we look at certain populations inside the United States, and we're going to talk about this a little later on, but also on the world level, is you got a lot of populations where they produce very charismatic or very genius type individuals. Because there was not a structure based around that particular person's talent, once that genius individual, that very charismatic individual, fell off and was no longer on the planet, everything they built fell by the wayside. And this is why structure is so important, is because it allows you to take your talent and your gift and what you can bring to the world and institutionalize it. So even though you're not still here, what you built can continue to carry on. And so this is why you're not taught this in school, because you're part of perpetuating somebody else's structure, but you're really not taught how to build your own structure. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into that. So this is going to be for the person who's interested in legacy, they're interested in longevity, and they're interested in building something that's going to be bigger than themselves that can last after they're no longer on the planet. Okay. And they also want to learn how to take their control and take their power and scale it out over territory and over geography. So let's go ahead and get into it. So what you're going to have first is the organizer or chief admin. Okay. So this is going to be the person, excuse me, that comes up with the idea of this particular structure and what it's going to be needed for. Excuse me. So the organizer, chief admin, decides, okay, we're going to build this particular structure for this particular reason. They have the idea and they have the vision of what they're trying to build, and they have the will to put it together. Okay. Next, that organizer or chief admin finds what we would call vice presidents. And these are going to be the people that are going to help them bring their vision to life. And he incentivizes them by giving them control of a particular resource or a business. Okay. So he finds several vice presidents and tells them, hey, I'm going to give you control of a resource or a particular business. I'm going to give you a certain level of recognition and prestige. That's how he incentivizes their behavior to help him bring this particular vision or organization or idea to life. And he runs them horizontally. So all the vice presidents are lateral to each other, but they primarily report to the organizer or chief admin. This is very, very important. And this is already where most people miss out. They don't have the conceptual understanding of this is how this needs to be built. So we understand, we start looking at the vice presidents, is that you can move these horizontally into infinity. As long as you have enough responsibilities and tasks, when each vice president can essentially have their own area that they operate in. So the reason why you build this is because you don't want people overlapping and dealing with each other's situation. So let's say, for example, we're going to control Atlanta, Georgia. So we want vice presidents. So we need somebody to control transportation. We need another person to control water treatment. We need another person to control the energy utility. We need another person to control law enforcement. We need another person to control healthcare. Each vice president has their own area that they operate in, and they only report to the organizer or chief admin. So if you're controlling transportation, you don't worry about what's going on with water treatment. So you don't get an overlap. So everybody has their own responsibility as a vice president. And like I said, it's based on the areas that need to be covered. You can move this horizontally into infinity. So we understand that the vice presidents are responsible for a business or controlling a resource. Then what those vice presidents do is they hire lieutenants or middle managers that control a specific territory. So like I said before, is where you're going to use Atlanta as a example. A person is going to control transportation in Atlanta. Then you hire lieutenants to control College Park. You hire another lieutenant to control Decatur. You hire another lieutenant to make sure that they're responsible for downtown Atlanta. Then you got the outlying areas. Same thing with water treatment. Same thing with healthcare. Same thing with energy. So every vice president says, well, I need to get a specific number of lieutenants that can now control a specific territory. You see the same thing in organized crime. So you got a boss. The boss will say, hey, I got a particular lieutenant. I'm going to give that lieutenant gambling. And then that particular lieutenant that controls gambling now says, I need a vice president, let's say hypothetically New York. I need a vice president in each one of the boroughs to control gambling for me in each one of the particular boroughs. And so each lieutenant now has control over a specific territory. This is very, very important because at the same way with the vice presidents, you want the lieutenants to have a specific territory so they're not overlapping into other people's territories. And you tell them, you control everything in this territory. That's your job. And then you report to me, the vice president. Now, what you have is the lieutenants now create soldiers. OK, and the soldiers' job is to execute orders from the lieutenants. So now, like I said before, you got a lieutenant whose job is to control transportation in College Park. He now goes and finds some soldiers that can execute their will in that particular area to make sure transportation is controlled. And they figure out how to incentivize those particular lieutenants. And then the same thing goes for every lieutenant or middle manager that's controlling a specific territory. Okay, same thing. If you're a soldier in College Park and your job is to worry about transportation, you don't go to Decatur and start messing with transportation because they already got a lieutenant or middle manager over that area, and they already have soldiers over that area whose job is to take orders from their lieutenant and middle manager and make sure that they're managing transportation. Same thing is that if you're a soldier in College Park and your job is to handle transportation, you don't start getting involved in public health because you got a vice president over public health. They got a lieutenant and middle manager over the particular territory of College Park. And then they also have soldiers whose job is to execute those orders in the area of public health. Same thing if you look at organized crime. If you're handling gambling in Brooklyn, okay, and you're a soldier for the lieutenant that is handling gambling in Brooklyn, then you don't go and start getting involved in prostitution in Brooklyn because somebody already has that particular area. So what it stops is people fighting for pieces of other people's pie. It stops people fighting for overlap and trying to control everything in themselves. And it keeps the soldiers focused on what their particular job is for that particular lieutenant or middle manager. Now we're going to go into what's the area under the soldiers. It's going to be the crash test dummies. So what the soldiers would do is they will go and recruit crash test dummies to do the really, really dangerous jobs. And this is what the average person in society is accustomed to. They've been raised around a bunch of crash test dummies. Okay, and they've been made to think that the crash test dummies are the real criminals. When in reality, the soldiers of these particular lieutenants, they're using the crash test dummies to take all the risks that they don't want to take. Okay, and so they find people that really don't understand the big picture, really don't understand what's going on. They're very easy to incentivize them. They're kind of confused about how the world really works. And they use them and they manipulate them to take a lot of high risk situations, put them in a lot of hazardous situations to do the jobs that the soldiers don't want to do. Okay, because the soldiers at one time may have been crash test dummies. They were able to move up the particular hierarchy. So now they got to find some new crash test dummies to do what they don't want to do. And the average person has only been exposed to crash test dummies. That's what they've been exposed to, especially when we start talking about criminality. And they've been taught that the crash test dummy is the person to look up to. And really, they're just crash test dummies. They were brought in to do the most dangerous jobs and receive the least amount of benefit. Okay. So now the next level is going to be the enforcers. And so I want you to understand the importance of the enforcers. The organizer or the chief admin, he uses enforcers. Okay. If something goes wrong with the vice presidents. Now, every one of the levels may have some enforcement team internal to them. So the vice president may have their own enforcement team. The lieutenants and middle managers may have their own enforcement teams. The soldiers may have their own enforcement teams. But the organizer, the chief admin, has his own group, specialized group of enforcers. So if the vice presidents get out of hand, the enforcers come in and they get rid of that middle manager. I'm sorry, they get rid of that vice president. Okay. If a lieutenant or a middle manager gets out of hand, if the vice president can't handle it, the enforcers for the organizer, chief admin, they come in and handle that middle manager. If they have problems with soldiers and the lieutenant or middle manager can't handle it, the enforcers come in and get rid of that lieutenant or middle manager because they have to be able to handle their soldiers. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? So the enforcers are really, really important And a lot of times this hierarchy starts off with the organizer or chief admin and a group of enforcers first, and then they build everything out because they have enforcers that are going to execute the will or the politics of that organizer or chief admin. So this is really, really important. Okay. So this doesn't work without those death squad enforcers at the top of this particular hierarchy, because they're really not at the top, but they're attached to the organizer, chief admin. And everybody knows if they don't play ball the way the organizer, chief admin wants them to play the ball, he going to get on the phone call. He going to call in that death squad and people going to start disappearing. So when you want to look at the parallels in, normal life or regular life to this particular structure, you see the same type of structure in business. Most businesses are based on this particular vertical hierarchy that you see. Government utilizes this at a very, very high level. And when we start looking at this particular structure, the way it's laid out, most states that are failing in governance, when you look at states in Africa, you look at states in Central South America, they're failing in their governance because they don't have this type of structure. What they have is an organizer, a chief admin. They have some enforcers that are on the payroll, and then they got a bunch of crash test dummies, which are the population. And there's nobody in the middle to administrate anything. Okay. Their particular businesses or resources are being controlled by people from outside the country. So they never build this internal to their country. But what they do is they create an organizer or a chief admin. They create a bunch of enforcers to eliminate any crash test dummy that has a problem with the way things are going. And they just sit back and collect the money. But what you have is a failed state because of that. So this is the problem that you see in the world, is that this particular structure is not being built out. And because most people have not been exposed to this type of structure, when they build something out, they build out the organizer, a chief admin, which most people like to call the boss. They create some enforcers, and then they try to turn everybody into a crash test dummy. And that's the extent of their thinking in this particular area, because they never seen what the middle looks like. Because in your day-to-day life, you're not taught this type of workflow. You're just involved in it. You may be supporting it with your work and with your effort, but you're not taught how the whole workflow works. So military uses it. Criminal organizations use it. Community-based organizations use it. And this structure scales as long as there are enough resources and jobs to allow the scale. So we talked about before is that this particular situation can scale into infinity with your vice presidents, as long as you have enough resources to reward them and you have enough jobs to appoint to them. Because you, like I said before, is that you want to have it to where the vice presidents have their own area that they operate in, and they don't worry about other areas. And then for the vice president's area, they got enough where the middle managers that can control a specific territory, they have enough going on in their territory where they're not trying to take somebody else's territory, because they have to feed their soldiers. So you got to have enough meat on the bone. You got to have enough pieces of the pie to keep everybody happy to scale this out. So the way this is scaled out in the United States is going to look differently than the way this can be scaled out in the Dominican Republic, because the United States has so much more meat on the bone for so many more people to be involved in this type of structure. So I wanted to give this to you because I keep seeing over and over again, as a person that was really involved in business, is that people don't have the ability. They haven't been taught how to build this kind of structure out. This is the kind of stuff they really don't teach you in school. And so you really got to understand how this game is played to be successful. And so when you look at any really successful organization, successful military, successful government, they're utilizing this particular structure, and they're utilizing it at a very high level. And you can be involved in it, but they'll never teach you how to build it out for yourself. And a lot of times when you're looking at a failed state, whether you're looking at Africa, you're looking at the Caribbean, you're looking at Central and South America, they're failing because this particular structure has not been built out. And we're going to talk about that later today. But I wanted to go ahead and give you step one of this particular curriculum. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. If you know somebody that would benefit from this, share this out to them. This is David W. Williams, and I'll talk to you later.